2 days after Mr. Al-Megrahi's application for compassionate release was filed, his health deteriorated rapidly. Now, his prognosis was less than 3 months. However, this was the assessment not of the range of specialists who'd seen him before. No, this was the assessment of just one person, whose name, indeed whose expertise, have been blanked out of the record. The official medical assessment, written on the 3rd of August, states, in the opinion of his blank, who has dealt with him prior to, during and following diagnosis of metastatic prostate cancer, and having seen him during each of these stages, his clinical condition has declined significantly over the last week. The clinical assessment, therefore, is that a 3-month prognosis is now a reasonable estimate for this patient. Richard Simpson is well qualified to comment, an MSP, a former Justice Minister, and a GP who studied prostate cancer and ran a hospice.
It's extremely difficult to determine, and with the improved psychological well-being that Mr. Megrahi will undoubtedly feel from being home and with his own family, his life expectancy could expect to improve quite significantly.
So we could be looking at years?
Well, we could certainly be looking at months. I would say years are probably unlikely because of the nature of the condition and the tumour itself. But certainly we could be looking at significantly more than 3 months. We could have families in America and here who've suffered having to see this man alive now for a really quite a prolonged period of time.
Mr. Al-Megrahi's release has, of course, caused comment and consternation well beyond Edinburgh. From President Obama to the head of the FBI to Hillary Clinton. However, one person we haven't yet heard from is the UK Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. Downing Street says it's not a matter for him. Today, we did get a statement, well, a letter, congratulating England on winning the Ashes. On Lockerbie, Mr. Brown is still silent. He commented on Britain's Got Talent, but he won't comment on Britain releases terrorists.
Britain didn't release terrorists. The Scottish Minister for Justice made a decision under his devolved power to release Megrahi. That was how the decision was made. And again, by your very question, the way you phrased it indicates you don't understand devolution. Devolution is about decisions that are devolved to Scotland being made here in Edinburgh. That's why we've got this Parliament.
I don't want to have to shout too much.
The Edinburgh Fringe is in full swing. There is, though, nothing peripheral about Scottish politics right now. It is at the centre of the world's glare. Scotland's international reputation under pressure as never before in the 10 years since devolution.
David Grossman. Well, Alex Salmond returned to his constituency after the debate. And when he joined us from Aberdeen, I began by asking him why exactly Justice Minister Kenny MacAskill had to go and meet Al-Megrahi in person.
This was in connection with the prisoner transfer agreement. Now, this was the first PTA in history which didn't have the consent necessarily of the prisoner concerned, and therefore Mr Megrahi had the right of representation. Now, because of the importance and uniqueness of the issue, Kenny MacAskill had taken oral representations from all parties, from the Libyan government, the American government, from the families in Lockerbie, from the UK families, from a Spanish family, and by video link from the United States families. So given that he had taken direct representations from all the interested parties, when Mr Megrahi elected to make his representations directly, Kenny MacAskill believed in the interests of natural justice that that could not be refused. So it was part of the process of the prisoner transfer agreement.
Whether it was about prisoner transfer or not, will we know the details of that conversation?
Well, Kenny MacAskill indicated we're going to publish whatever we can, and you'll find over the next few days that the Scottish Government is willing to publish every significant matter as far as this decision-making is concerned. We have absolutely nothing to hide.
Well, I'm joined now by John Bolton, former United States Ambassador to the UN, and Oliver Miles, who was UK Ambassador to Libya in 1984 when diplomatic relations were broken off after the murder of PC Yvonne Fletcher outside the Libyan embassy. Good evening, gentlemen. John Bolton, first of all, you heard there both Alex Salmond and before him in the Scottish Parliament, Kenny MacAskill, saying this decision was taken on humanitarian grounds, not in terms of trade or any other reason. Does that perhaps assuage some of your anger?
No, and you know, you have to be practical about how decisions are made in government. I'm sure that the decision was the Justice Secretary's alone, but we know that a minister in the Foreign Office in London had written urging consideration. We know that Gordon Brown raised the issue with Muammar Gaddafi at the G20 meeting. The notion that somehow the government in London didn't participate in the decision that Secretary McCaskill made is just fanciful. This was a decision that the government in London wanted, and it's the decision they got.
Oliver Miles, he's right, isn't he?
I agree with a good deal of what he said, but I wonder about the last part. Does the Scottish government really do what the British government wants? I question that. I'm not an expert on UK politics in that sense.
But tell me, in your assessment then, no matter what Kenny McCaskill's imperatives were, you know, whether it was his main consideration was on compassionate release, are you saying then that the underlying reasons for this can definitely be laid at Gordon Brown's door?
No, I think that's wrong. I think that the Libyans have been trying for a long time to get Megrahi out. They started, so far as I know, they may have started earlier, but they started certainly as long back as Tony Blair's visit to Libya in 2004, when one of the subjects which was discussed was the possibility of a prisoner transfer agreement. I think that the Libyans were given to understand by Tony Blair that the agreement might embrace Megrahi. If so, then Tony Blair was guilty of what we call sofa government. He didn't obviously have his advisors with him. He didn't take advice, because if he had taken advice, he would have known that it wasn't in his gift. It was a matter for the Scottish government. Now, when the Libyans realized that, of course, they were disgruntled, obviously, and ever since then, they have tried every means to persuade the British government to release Megrahi. And when I say every means, Peter Mandelson said the other day that every conversation with a senior Libyan included pressure on the subject of Megrahi. That's perfectly true, but that doesn't mean that the decision was taken in London. It doesn't mean that the decision was taken with business considerations in mind. What it means is that the debate continued, and it proved that the application of the prisoner transfer agreement to the Megrahi case was going to be difficult or perhaps impossible. And then rather late in the day, up comes the possibility of humanitarian release, which is quite different.
Right. John Bolton, in the realpolitik, even America under George Bush normalized relations with Libya again. The truth is that the Bush administration was well aware that this issue was going to raise its head, and soon.
But the Bush administration has been out of office since January, and what President Bush and Prime Minister Blair got from Libya was a renunciation of their nuclear weapons program. I think this is something that, as we see now, has cast Libya's good faith across the board substantially into doubt. There's a poll that was taken in the United States over the weekend that shows 82% of Americans were against this release. That's a phenomenal number, and I think if this gentleman lives beyond 3 months, I don't even want to think about what the discussion will be then.
Oliver Miles, just finally on that point, it seems a very macabre thing to discuss, but the question of his survival, and we heard earlier from a doctor and a former Justice Secretary in the Scottish Parliament that the psychological fillip, apart from anything else, will give Megrahi a lift. That it is possible with the different kinds of treatment and so forth that Megrahi could be living this time next year.
Well, I agree with your word macabre. I think this is a disgusting way of looking at the problem. And I'd like to ask John Bolton whether he agrees.
I'm afraid there's no time for that. I'm so sorry.
I'd like to say this man should have been put to death. He should have been tried in the United States. We never should have given him over to Scotland and the UK.
I would like to ask John Bolton whether he agrees with the Scottish Justice Minister that there is no consideration given to compassion in the American legal system.
Of course there is. Governors and the federal government have the possibility of giving compassionate parole for any of a number of reasons. But I would just say this. This man served less than 2 weeks per person that he killed, 270 dead, less than 2 weeks. It is just incredible that you could say that as somebody who got a sentence of 2 weeks for killing a person gets off for compassionate relief. It is incomprehensible, shameful, and frankly pathetic.
Thank you both very much. I'm afraid we've run right out of time.